Well, I'm Paul Wilson. Family owned the property up where the new town library is now.
That's right.
And
Hainsworth?
yes, Hainsworth.
Yeah, sure.
And she was a Hainsworth, and her dad ran a plumbing shop down in the Avis block.
Yeah. That must have been a wonderful estate when it was all developed with that house, and I assume it was all cleared down to the water and lawns and everything.
I can't really remember whether it was, I lived there when I was first born for a few months because my mother was quite sick, and after that was really the only time I ever lived there. And then the family built a cabin up there on the hill also that was used by some of the relatives in the summertime.
Yeah.
And there was a garage. And then over years, the Times kind of took care of it as far as it was vacant for a while, quite a while, and there were a few fires set and so on, and that didn't do any good.
I remember it was wide open in the 50s.
Yes, yes it was.
Well, my name's Harry Beckwith, and I've only lived in town for 3 years, but my mother's family come from here, although they're not anything like the Peirces. They're carpetbaggers who arrived after the Revolution.
I'm Tom Peirce, and I was born in Wickford in 1924, and I've always lived here. And family's been here for generations. In fact, my grandfather Smith, my mother's father, was born in Coquimcussick. And I've been, generation after generation have been here, I guess.
Now, do you have any Updike?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because I remember when John Updike, the writer, came to town, he sort of muttered something about the Updikes left, and I thought there were a hell of a lot of them left.
Not with the name of Updike, I don't believe, yeah.
Yeah. I remember Liza Lake was an Updike.
Oh yeah,
she told me so.
Yeah.
Did she really?
Yes,
she did.
Yeah. She's related to the Coopers and
everything.
Oh, yeah. When Liza died, her niece, who inherited her belongings, gave me a lot of her photographs and pictures of Wickford. That's where I got quite a few of them.
Was it?
Yeah.
Good, because that was sort of tricky. I remember Arthur Gardner had married a second time and moved his second wife in on his first dower into the floor of the house. Nobody put a cent into it to take care of it.
That's right, yeah.
Liza wouldn't, and he wouldn't. And Pauline was going crazy.
Yeah, it was in pretty rough shape when Liza died.
What do you think are the greatest changes you've seen in Wickford over the time you've lived in it?
Well, I think one of the most rewarding things that's happened is that people really have taken care of their property.
Yeah.
Certainly on Main Street and on Brown Street, back a few years ago, some of the properties didn't look too good.
No.
And I think for the most part, the owners now really take a great deal of pride in the way the property looks. And I know just this week, in preparing for the art show, I've seen people out trimming and mowing and cleaning up and raking and washing and everything, and they certainly want to put on a very good face for everybody, for all the hundreds and thousands that come for these 2 days.
What would you say the major industry, if you, what has Wickford got to sell today? I mean, years ago it would have been oysters maybe, and before that they were shipping, but and then of course there was the whole mill business. But what would you say today Wickford's got to sell? Bring people in to spend money.
I would say the atmosphere that's here. People really enjoy seeing these old houses from the 1700s and the 1800s and the tree-lined streets and the boats in the water, and a lot of people don't see that where they come from. I know a few years ago a couple moved here from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, And one day they went over to a beaver tail, and they didn't think, they thought things like that were only in movies. They had no idea that there was that kind of water and ocean and spray and and I think a lot of us take what we see every day for granted.
Well, I've sensed that certainly at times there's been a certain amount of tension between what you might call people who want to live in a house down here and people who want to run a business up there. And yet it also seems to me that maybe this kind of thing is easing up a bit because both ends of the thing of the game are realizing that one hand is washing the other. I don't know.
I would say so. I think several years ago there were some people, not necessarily from around here, but from out of town, who really wanted to do something different here, like every weekend in the summertime. And that's really not what it's for. And I think the art festival over these 28 years has done a great job, and the crowd that it brings is a great crowd. They're a great family crowd. You see a lot of people with children and their families, and they really come and enjoy it. And they certainly enjoy being able to go to the churches and eat clam cakes and chowder, and they really make it an outing.
Well, I'm astonished because I go out in February in the blasts with my dog to take care of the necessary, and there are people wandering about the streets on a Sunday afternoon buying teddy bears and sweatshirts as though they're going out of style, in sub-zero weather, and I still don't quite get it, but they seem to be doing it.
And you see them walking around with the cones of ice cream also, whether it's January or July.
Yeah.
And I think in the past few years, the business community has really settled down. It's not as transient as it used to be, and I think that's been a big advantage.
Yeah, I think you're right there. My feeling is it's found its feet. What would you say in your mind would be the greatest change you've seen in your life?
I think the greatest change was when Quonset came in.
Yeah.
Everything seemed to change at that time.
Yeah.
All of these old houses were made into apartments, and there were a lot of Navy people living in them, and then they built the housing project up on West Main Street in that old field, and that really made a big change, I think, and it brought a lot of new people into town, and I think that after the war a lot of them even came back here to settle down because they enjoyed the community so much, and they had made a lot of friends with the natives, and I think that they really enjoy it.
And then I guess running that spur of 95 down made a big difference too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Brown and Sharp also brought people this
in.
way.
Yeah, that's right.
I think one other big change that happened was the 38 hurricane.
Oh, yes.
Which actually brought us town water.
Why, it made the Republicans finally decide they had to accept FDR's boundary. And there are some of them who died too soon to see the housing project and all those streets named for various Democratic worthies removed.
Yeah, that's true.
You're right. I think you're right.
And I think a lot of people, I know Tom remembers when the fire department took water around day after day after day.
I've got pictures in that book.
Have you?
Of them.
Because everybody's well was useless because of the salt water. Because where we're sitting right now
was this deep in water.
Yeah,
and there were boats and, And then after that, they were forced into really, if we were going to live here, have town water.
Well, wasn't one of the great pictures of Marilyn Henry took looking down the Oyster?
My sister was with her the day they walked down the street, and I've got a lot of the pictures of the hurricane that you might be interested to see.
Oh, I would be, very much so. That's my first memory, was my father holding me up to my window in the back room, in the back of my grandmother's house. I know the window and all I can remember is that the trees were moving outside.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So I was born in 35, but that's the first thing I remember.
Yeah.
I remember coming home from school early. I think I was in the 3rd grade. And I didn't know why they let us out early. Nobody knew, just the wind was blowing.
Yeah.
And
it's a good thing you got out early because...
And the next day, my family, we came down to Wickford. At the time, we lived up in Lafayette. And my dad worked in the mill up in Lafayette, Rodman Mill. And we came down here, and I remember the trees across
Just couldn't
Main
believe
Street.
what you were seeing. No.
And the boats were all sitting in the middle of Main Street. And,
Well, Henry Tillinghast was talking, and I was listening to him, and his opinion was that Colonel Robert Rodman, while of course he had his political brothers, was a pretty straight man and probably had the community's interests most of the time pretty firmly in his mind.
I
think
would
that's
think
true.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Yeah.
And certainly the Rodman family, when they had the mill all those years, certainly did an awful lot for Lafayette as well
For
as the rest of the town.
Yeah.
And they certainly employed a lot of people and the housing and
I had a book that belonged to my Aunt Molly that on different pictures of the mill. I gave that to the library a number of years ago. I don't know whether they still have it or not, but
I hope they do.
after she died, it was the pictures of people working inside, you know, and quite a few pictures. And I gave it to the
You're
library.
in the library too, because that's where all this stuff
Oh, is that right?
done.
Oh,
Yeah.
gosh.
I worked in the mill, I think, 3 summers in the dye shop down in the back part of the mill. There was, in those days, the dye shops were not like they are now. I haven't seen any modern one, but I'm sure they're a lot different.
I bet
Oh,
they are.
yeah, and I bet they're a lot safer to work in.
And a lot cooler.
Mr. Wilson was mentioning that the broadening of the base of the population in town made a change. I would imagine for you that everything that was there before was still there, but there was more.
More to it, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, too, one thing that has stopped, which has been good, as far as Wickford really having more businesses or whatever, or more, is the fact that really this is an island almost. We're actually surrounded by water.
It is, and right up there by what used to be Romano's, I can't, Alfie's.
Yes.
That's all bridged
bridge,
over.
yeah.
Yes.
And I'll bet you anything, because I've seen what they're going to mess over Phillip Street, the DOT is.
By the Christian Science Church there.
Yeah, and the core samples that the road shows, the plan show for the state there, is all, that was marked.
Marked, yeah.
And I'll bet you at a flood tide, it was a miserable job getting through.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's very low there.
And that would have made Elamsville an island.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
And of course, this was.
There's water back here. There's
Yeah.
water out here.
Do you remember the Burge sisters that lived up on West Main
they're
Street?
Cousins. They were
Yeah.
cousins
Oh, they were?
around, certainly.
And of course, that book that their aunt or whatever was
Their
wrote, she
aunt.
called it the Venice of America, Wickford, the Venice of America.
Really? Is that what you call
She
it?
called the book Wickford, the Venice of America.
Yeah, it's a little sort of.
I got 4 copies of it, Paul.
Have you
She
really?
is one of the children of Lemuel Burge, who was the minister here for so
That's right,
long.
yeah.
And he married a Shaw. In fact, he married one of the daughters of the first Dr. Shaw, whose house
was-
had removed down to.
Down at Charleston.
Yeah. And those are my people.
I see.
No, I remember them. I remember being taken up there, and my mother wanted them to show me the outhouse.
Oh, they had,
They had an outhouse.
yes.
And they got, no, Sarah, we can't do that. And so I didn't get to see the outhouse, and my mother was very disappointed. She thought it'd be very nice for me to see one.
Yeah. I got a big kick out of after the Burge sisters died, a friend of mine bought that house, Sam Hibbard. And of course, outhouse was still there. And they still had the carpet that they put over the seat in the windows. So
Did they
that's
really?
the only one I ever saw that had a carpet, so you would sit on the carpet instead of sitting on the cold wood.
They were gently reared.
Yes.
But no, they were funny. And in the end, they were on welfare. But by God, they squirreled away money. And they took the money. They didn't know how to spend it down here, but they took it. They had a
East Greenwich,
stained glass
glass window in East Greenwich. Yeah.
Did they really?
Yeah, in St. Luke's.
Yeah, and the welfare people were going crazy because here they hadn't told them about this money. They said, but it was a memorial for dear Papa. Yeah, look at that. So,
I can see them walking up the streets now and coming to church in their long dresses.
I think it's interesting too to think of Brown Street in the number of stores that have come and gone, or the number of businesses, or the number of businesses that have changed where they are. And I think the major one would be Earnshaw's.
yes.
Yeah.
They have been in at least 3 or 4 different positions before they settled on where they are now.
Do you remember Dr. Young?
No, I don't.
You don't remember Dr. Young?
No.
Because he lived next door to me when I was a kid, so I remember
Okay.
him very well.
Yeah.
I can see him going up the street now. He was a little man. I've got his cane home, and it's only about so tall. You just can't imagine such a short cane that he would have used. He was quite crippled.
How do you think all the Wickford has come back? You know, I think has had an economic rebound certainly. But what do you think the popularity of people wanting to live down here in this area has meant to people who lived here for years and years and years? My feeling has been that maybe in some cases you're going to get a family with, say, 2 children, 3 children. So, parents finally die, and suddenly a house that was worth $14,000 is worth $250,000, $300,000. Nobody can afford to buy anyone else, and that family moves, and that's part of the community that's changed now. It's gone, and I don't quite know how to feel about that. I'm on the Historic District Commission, and it's the one thing that I find very bothersome is that you've got that, and then also for a lot of these same people, you're asking them to maintain their houses using materials and workmen and techniques that are very expensive compared to what they would have to spend up the
road. Yeah.
That's true.
How do you feel about that? You live here, and you, of course, close enough to it too yourself.
I don't think that has any one answer, really.
No, I don't.
I don't. With the one thing, whether it's a plus or a minus, right now certainly values have kind of leveled out.
They have now, yeah.
But I'm sure whether it's 4 years or 5 years or 10 years down the road, it will all happen again.
Well, I think the kind of thing I was talking about happens anyhow, but I think it was probably very much increased by suddenly Wickford became, this part of Wickford became very popular to live in.
Yes. And then I think a lot of people, it's very easy to forget the 38 hurricane and the 54 hurricane.
Yeah.
And unless someone sees the ravage,
You can't believe it.
You can't believe what it does.
You have to be in it.
Well, I
And there's also
in front of Ryan's there when the package store burst open. Maybe Judy didn't lock it up, but,
Right.
but every able-bodied man who was available was there fishing liquor out of the street.
And I think there's enough in all of us to think that nothing like that will ever happen to all of us or any of us. It makes a difference.
I think it's got to happen again, but I'm not looking forward to it.
No.
Well, and one thing that we don't know is that since they have the Providence barrier now, that water that used to go into Providence won't go, but it has to go somewhere.
It's got to go
which means
somewhere.
It's going to back down the bay.
Because I think a lot of these people who have bought recently in town don't realize that their house could have 3 or 4 feet of water on the first floor.
Well, you go up and look at that plaque on the front of the old...
The fire station, and also the
You don't realize
bookstore.
You don't realize when you're here that it's lower than where I was brought up down on Pleasant Street.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. I mean, you just seem to be going along an even
all
keel,
flat.
and it seems to be all flat. And where I lived there, we didn't have any water in the cellar even.
Well, now Mary Brimmer, I guess, is on about the highest.
Mary Brimmer's just about the
But
same.
she's lost half her lawn.
She's lost an awful lot of her frontage.
She showed me where it went to.
Yeah.
It's terrific. Maybe the width of this street almost.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Would you believe that if it hadn't been for Colonel Henry Babbitt's hiring David Sherman Baker, you might have had a main highway running through there with a bridge going across? Because the town wanted to put a bridge across Cornelius Island.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
Did they really?
Yeah.
And Babbitt raised hell because he said, if you do that, my mill and my, I'll never be able to get stuff in and out because water transport was it back then. And he got his lawyer to stop it, and they stopped it. But that could have been a main street.
Main Street, yeah.
And I go and walk down Elam Street, and I think to myself, this is probably something like what Brown Street might have been like,
in the era,
100 years ago. Because if that bridge hadn't gone out, and they put the new one in down below, that street would have been developed. And it never did.
No.
I think one other factor that had a great deal of impact on the business of Wickford was building the town parking lot in the 60s.
Yes.
And certainly nowadays that would be impossible
Yeah.
because of coastal and DEM.
Oh, you never could do it.
No.
No.
And the cost of it, and I think it cost, what was it, less than $100,000 as I recall. Tom,
I don't remember the exact
something like
figures.
that.
You can get a good toilet for that these days.
That's right.
Just
you can't-
about, that's about all, Harry.
The new facility up in back of the library will probably cost more than the whole parking lot cost.
Just about.
Well, there was some talk about it, and I said, well, you're going to put in one of those low flash jobs? Oh, no. I said, well, no, not to worry. Just get in there with a cherry bomb, and I said, I'll take care of that. Oh, no, that's going to happen. They're putting in something you'd use in a prison. You'll never blow it up. I said, well, we're going to waste a lot of water.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good idea to have that facility.
Well, it's too bad it's taken so long, and of course that's increased the price of it, and because certainly the price is very hard for anybody to understand,
Yeah.
especially when the town already owns the land and they already own the septic system that the system is going to go into.
Yeah.
The old Miss Rebecca Shaw, who was the last one to live in that house before Henry Gerard got it, used to complain bitterly about the coal dock out in back. I gave my grandfather he was unloading coal there because she liked her garden, which was more or less for the other half of your store is
On the back.
water.
Yeah.
Right.
So it all changes.
Do you remember when the Rodmans had the coal dock down on Main Street?
All I can, well, it was on, they owned half of
They
this
owned
side.
the other side, yeah, this side over here.
Yeah. I guess sort of. I remember a seafood place. Would it have been the Belmores?
Belmore's had that, yeah, after the 38 hurricane.
That's all I remember, really.
Yeah.
And I remember the Rodman Mill, they had horses, and the horses used to come
down-
all the
oh, I
way
can
from
remember that. I can
Lafayette
see it.
by horse down with their coal wagon to pick up the coal and go all the way back
All
to
the way
Lafayette.
back to Lafayette with a wagon load of coal. Yeah, I remember that very well.
And then the horses used to go out all summer and do the haying and cut hay all around the houses in the Lafayette. And then in the wintertime, those same horses dragged an old wooden plow that used to plow. And the horses were Tom and Jerry, which I'm sure a lot of horses have been named over
that,
the years.
right.
And a lot of these trees have grown up from when all the trees came down in the 38 hurricane.
A few of them like this one didn't go down.
No,
Well, these were lucky. They
Yeah.
stayed. I gather they tripped like the devil, but they stayed.
and I think one thing that has really brought Wickford along has been exactly what's happening today, the art festival.
It's brought a lot of,
An
and I
awful
think
lot
that
of people.
they come down and they get the idea, well, they couldn't see everything, so they'll come back after the festival's over and look around.
I get the notion that when they were setting up the historic district that, you know, clearly some kind of deal was cut as to where it was going to end and begin and everything, because everyone had to be more or less happy with it. And at that time, from what I can make out, and what little I can remember, it was sort of expressed to people in the business district that in fact this was going to have a wash-off effect on them and they were going to profit. But I think they were in a way talking through their hats at the time. I mean, it could happen, it might happen, it might not happen, but I think in the end it did happen.
I think so.
But I think at the time
It was strictly a hope,
yeah, well, a campaign promise.
right? Which a lot of those are made.
Yeah,
And certainly, Tom mentioned one of the big factors was the coming of Quonset, and I think another big factor was the
Closing of it,
Quonset.
yeah.
Well,
I know that upset an awful lot of people, changed a lot of people's lives. Real estate and everything, especially out on the post road.
funny though, the state police barracks coming back there.
That was a good thing, I think.
I think it's a good thing,
yeah.
but it's funny. Oh, was it your grandfather who had the Cold Spring House?
No, it was his cousin, my
Okay.
grandfather's cousin. My grandfather was town clerk.
Okay, that's okay. Well, he almost bought Oakland's to run a hotel in. And he was going through the property. This was when Babbitt had it. He was going to rent it, actually. And he was going through the property when, unfortunately, he fell through the side porch. Carpenter ants had been at work. And at that point, he decided he's better off building his own. It's in those letters.
That's
underlined.
yeah.
Did the Carpenters buy that from your family, Tom?
Carpenter and Peirce, wasn't it?
Chapman bought it from, I think they did, from some of the relatives there.
Yeah.
Because Henry Chapman had it for a long time.
Yes, he did. Must have been, what, 50 years
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
or better? I remember seeing people rocking in their rocking chairs out on the porch.
I can remember a lot of the people would come down to the bank to cash their checks from, have to get some money every week to.
Right.
Came back year after year.
Remember an old number who used to wear +4s and a sort of
Oh, yes, I do.
Mr. Wiley Wilson?
Yeah, Wiley Wilson.
yes.
I remember him very well, yeah.
They were white, and he always wore a white hat.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can remember him going by the house, and I can remember Allie Wilcox going.
Oh,
Oh,
Allie,
yes.
yes, yeah.
And Allie always had on his long coat, even in a
I remember that
hot summer day.
during the last hurricane in '54, Allie spent the time with us in the bank.
Did he really?
And he,
Warm.
because he was down in Wickford,
Yeah.
and there was just no place to go.
No.
So he came in and visited us. I'll never forget it. He just talked all the time, that it was going on.
Well, he had a lot of information.
Yes, he did.
He was a very kind man.
And he could quote most every tombstone out in the Elm Grove Cemetery.
Could he really?
Oh, yes, he'd say this one so-and-so, and when they were born, and when they died, and the inscription on the stone, and get
He
used to
got irritated once in Ryan's over something some member of the family had said to him, and I believe he allowed, he started pointing out to him exactly how they were related.
Oh.
And how he could tell them a few things
Yeah.
about their family.
He had a lot of characters in town over the years. You don't see that. Remember Captain Skinner?
Yes.
Yeah, he lived on a boat right down here off Fowler Street. I can see him now. A lot of these old people that lived in these houses. When I walk up the street, sometimes I think way back when I was a kid going to the school up in the Methodist church up there.
Oh,
And I went to the first and second grade there and used to have to go up to the outhouse. Nowadays they would think that was just terrible.
Couldn't happen.
Couldn't happen. But that wasn't too many years ago.
I think two things that before the art festival that really people look forward to was the two fairs that we had each summer,
Village
Legion
Fair,
Fair and
yes.
the St. Paul's
Yeah.
Village Fair.
it was over in front of where I live now for a long time, and then it went to Mary Metcalf.
That's right. And then the Legion Fair was at the school grounds.
yeah.
Yep. And people really look forward to that every
did,
summer.
yeah.
And then in the war we had the theater.
Yes. Remember throwing popcorn into the can? Sure. Come bouncing back.
And of course during that period of time it survived because people couldn't have enough gasoline to get out of town to go to the movies.
That's right.
So
Yeah, and television, I guess, was still coming thing.
that was really 46 or 47 before TV really made much of an impact. I remember there was a gentleman that had an appliance store, Walter Peirce.
Well, he sold radios
Peirce.
down. He was down in where the bookstore is, and then he was across the street in the Avis block for a while.
And he had TVs when they first came out, and the only television channel was out of Boston. And the clarity was not very good. And he used to put it on at night so people could watch the baseball games from outside.
Yeah, in the window.
And he'd say, see that curve? All you could see was snow. I mean, you couldn't even see the ball.
No, I bought a radio from him in 1954, a little Hallicraft with shortwave, and my nephew was still using it. He had to get some new tubes, but it's still...
Still operating.
Yeah, still there.
That's marvelous. Well, Harry and Tom, I'm going to have to leave, but I've enjoyed my chat.
I think Paul's done a wonderful job with his store.
Yeah.
But I can remember when I first went to work at the bank, the post office was next door. Then there was the coal yard and all that. And Ann Manning had her dress shop in there, and then she moved across the street. Yeah. See you, Paul. Nice to see you.
Tremendous.
Good to see you, Paul. Thank you.
How do you figure the historic preservation thing? Do you think it's been a good thing by and large?
Yes, I do.
Any problems with it?
No problems, no. No. I think if you don't have some kind of restrictions, everybody would be sorry.
I think
Because
so.
somebody would come in and they would do something that would just go against the...
I think so. On the other hand, I also have sensed, I think sometimes people
You don't want to be
feeling-
told what you can do
Yeah,
with your property.
and
You're
then-
paying the taxes on it. And
Yeah, and it's another layer of people who can tell you what you can do and what you can't do between, you know, on top of what already exists. And also, once or twice I've seemed to sense people suggesting perhaps that this particular commission, at least at some point in its history, had kind of a bad odor about it. It was kind of heavy-handed. And I don't know, but I think what we're trying to do now is make it more of a user-friendly thing, and it's really there to serve the people who live within the borders that it operates under and to protect their interests.
I never had any problem with them because when I owned the Shippey house up there on West Main Street, I had no problem with anything.
It's funny, I come under historic preservation over where I am on... Yeah, but only because I come under coastal. And because I come under coastal, I come under the Providence, the Rhode Island Historic Preservation people.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And because I come under them, I don't have to come under myself down here. So it's a funny world. I'm just as glad they kept it on. The option, of course, was if you didn't take what the legislature had handed out to you, with a few things you could change one way or another, you weren't going to have it at all.
Yeah.
So...
As I say, Wickford has changed a lot, and it has improved a lot since the hurricane. As Paul said, since the hurricane, a lot of the people that owned the houses, the rents were low, and they just couldn't afford to maintain them.
Yeah.
So they just kept going down and down and down. Then after the hurricane, they were forced to sell them, and people bought them and gradually improved them.
I heard somewhere, and I can't remember now where, that maybe when they were thinking of developing colonial Williamsburg, that some of those people came and looked around here and decided when the hurricane had hit that no, this wasn't where they wanted to do it.
I never heard that, no.
I know Henry Ford at one point wanted to buy the old Narragansett Church. There was some sort of quiet offer, maybe through nomination or something like that.
Yes. But it is a nice place. It's a nice place to live.
It is. It's quiet. What do you think might be going to happen in the future? This is always... What'll happen is, now, 25, 30, 40 years from now, people looking and say, oh, he had it right, or...
Yeah, no, I have no idea. It's hard to tell.
Because I bet when they had shops, in a lot of these houses, they never thought it would go to residential and all of that.
No, they didn't, no.
Did zoning come into North Kingstown easily or kind of hard?
Kind of hard, yeah. People didn't accept it too easily.
I gather that they did just Wickford finally. That initially they tried the whole town, they couldn't do it.
No.
But what was it that people were objecting to? Was it mostly people with big, huge holdings?
Oh, I think so, yeah. They didn't want to see it changed.
Yeah.
Henry's still here talking.
Yeah, well, he's an interesting man.
Yeah, oh, he is, yeah.
I never met him before.
Never did before, yeah.
But my uncle always said he was, he was a fan man.
Yes, he is, yeah. Yeah.
And so I thought it'd be interesting to talk with him sometime, find out what it was like from that end of the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm sort of wound out.
Yeah, I am too.
But I'm very glad to meet you, and I'll give you a ring, and I'll get these
And
things down
so
to
you might like to see those. I've got a lot of old pictures
Oh, I'd
and old
love
books.
to. I'd love to.
Things that,
I'd love to.
that I've had given to me over the years. People didn't know what to do with them, so.
No, well, it's a good thing because
I got a lot of things that came from right here that I went over to see Virginia's husband, and he was tossing them out.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The Hundo plates.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Virginia just died in March.
I know.
Her husband died just a short time later.
Yeah.
But I went over to see him, and he had all these things to go to the dump.
Well, they do. You know, people do that kind of thing.
Didn't interest him. They were very interesting to Virginia, but
Well, he wouldn't have cared. He didn't come from
he
here.
didn't come from here.
anyway.
No, he came from Providence.
You know what else I have? Did we go by?
Just wasn't interested. But they got saved, so.
The Conservancy Commission, you know, that Bill Nipwaring is on, that looks after wildlife and stuff, has been told that it's got to start considering some kind of a policy on trees.
Oh.
And I've been worrying quite a bit about a big old oak that's right up by Caroline's yarn shop. It's huge.
I know, yeah.
It's a wonderful tree. And it's so close, I mean, it's this far from the road,
Yeah.
the width of this table, and they go in there digging for that 102 remake, Phillips remake. And then there was some discussion over two trees like this down.
I saw they had a cross on them where they.
Well, the notion was the people who lived there decided they'd like them cut down. And then that word got out, and some people went over to the town hall, and it became apparent that, in fact, there were a lot of people who didn't want them cut down, and in fact, they'd moved here because they liked trees. If you didn't like trees, you could go and live. Well, there's parts of South Providence that you would like very much.
Sure.
And so there was that, and then it also, I think, came out that probably the trees belonged to the town anyhow, because, you know, the property lines didn't come out
to this
Yeah.
after the sidewalk.
So I don't know what's to come of it, but it's
I'd hate to
bad.
see him take them down.
I would too. But I gather they miss.
Yeah.
They miss terrific. And there are a couple down in front of Sabos too.
Oh yes, those are nice trees. Yeah.
We aren't all like A.T. Cross, don't have the money to move the house away
No, we
from
don't.
it.
No. How true.
Well, thank you very
Good,
much.
Harry. Yep. Fine.
Mary.
Still call a fish market Keema's. What can I say? You mean you don't know where Keema's is?
Well, Jean, welcome to
Thank
our
you.
oral history
you
afternoon
for
here at
inviting
the
me
Art
to come.
Festival. July 14, 1990 is today, and it's quite a lively day here on Main Street in Wickford. Mrs. Chapman, it's really a pleasure to have you with us because you are a native of Wickford. You go back to your childhood here, and you have returned recently to live again on the street of
That
your
is true.
youth.
That is true.
And I'm sure that that has a great deal of pleasure in it. And obviously it does, because here you are.
That's right. That's right.
Can you tell us about your early recollections here in the village?
Well, my mother was born here, was married here in the last house on the left out on the end of the street, and spent all of her childhood here until she went off to college. And after she got married and lived in Vermont a short time, they came back here to Wickford, or Rhode Island actually, to Cranston. And we came down here for vacations and summertime. And then after the 1938 hurricane, she inherited quite a bit of property on the street, among which was End of Main, which is the last house on the
Which is your house.
Right, it's the one we're presently in now.
Mm-hmm.
And my first recollection was about 1938 after the hurricane, and seeing this street, which was, well, I can still see it. I can still see the big elms all the way down this street, across the street, just laying flat. And sitting myself, I was more concerned about a doll carriage than 6 inches of mud in the houses. And actually, that was my first tantrum of the day, probably, crying about a doll carriage that happened to be an English pram that my aunt had bought me, and they were throwing it overboard because it was no longer going to be of any value to anyone. But that's one of my first recollections as a real young child. And as I say, we spent summers here from 1938 on. I was never really involved in any of the town affairs other than overhearing. My grandfather, of course, was chairman of the school committee for over 25 years, so he was very, very active in the town, very involved in the town, very committed to the town.
Your grandfather was?
My grandfather was James Reynolds. And he was very active in the Wickford Baptist Church. My grandmother was the organist there. So, you know, I remember so many of the people and so many of the things that I don't know of anybody that's still alive that even in this town other than Tommy Peirce probably, or Tommy Morgan even. Tommy Morgan lives down on Pleasant Street. He might remember some of these things.
Tom was here this morning and talked with us.
Oh, great.
Yes, very lively session.
Oh, he's wonderful, yes.
He and Paul Wilson talked together.
Yes.
With Harry Beckwith.
And Paul too, I guess, but Paul never really lived in town, I don't think. But see, again, I don't think he did he?
I'm not
I don't
sure
think he
myself.
lived on Main Street. No, I don't think so. But Tommy is always, his family has always been, you know, here in this town. I mean, he goes back at least 3 generations that I know of. And of course, Tommy Peirce has always been active, and his family before him, and his father before him. So, and the Reynolds family, it was a large Reynolds family, and they were sea captains, and they came and built or bought these houses. I don't think my mother did either. I mean, we knew of some of the houses that they bought, but there were several, maybe 6 brothers. I think that's what it was. There were 6 brothers.
6 Reynolds brothers?
Yes.
Where would you go for the bathroom, men's room? Is there any? Annette, hold on.
You're on camera.
Oh my God.
It isn't candid either.
Welcome.
I just want an answer, even if I'm on camera.
There's a public toilet, but it's at the other end of Main Street. Go up as far as you can walk up Main Street and ask at the corner, and they'll show you where it is.
Thank you.
I love it.
Just keep it on the film.
Oh, this is what I mean.
Here we are.
This is our town.
This is our
love
town,
it. Oh, I love it. This will be a story I could tell my grandchildren since they're visiting me right now.
Jean, all of us dearly loved your mother, Betty Tabor, and we regret her loss. All of us, the family and all her friends. I remember one of my most vivid recollections was a visit to her during her very courageous operation. In her last year, she had a hip replacement, I think.
Yes.
And she went ahead and did that, and Marsu, my wife, and I went down to South County Hospital, and we walked in on her, surprised her. She was reading a novel, and she quickly hid the novel under the counterpane. She didn't want us to see what it was.
Oh, dear.
Well, it was a rather lively thing, but we had a lovely conversation with her, and she was her terrific self as always. And
she has great memories of the town, and she never really talked about it much until maybe the last 10 or 12 years that she was here. She was very involved with her profession, and that kept her busy as a counselor in a high school in the city. And so much of her life was dedicated to her profession.
I didn't realize that she was a counselor.
Oh, yeah. She was a guidance counselor at Cranston East for at least 15 years. You see, she taught at Cranston from 1930 on, off and on. So she was very much of a pillar of the school, and that's.
Well, her educator quality came through, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah. She was quite outspoken, and.
Yes, she had many things to say, especially if you parked in front of her house. If you put your 4 wheels in front of her house, or if your cat or dog happened to come into her yard and wasn't very pleasant, she'd let you know about it. Yeah, she was very outspoken, but she was honest.
She also had a good sense of humor and a ready smile. My recollections of your mother also include stories I heard from Don Cady, who was her neighbor. Don is gone too, and Don told me about how they used to engage in discussions, as he put it, over the fence line and whose side of the tree was on in the backyard there.
Well, good fences make good neighbors. You've heard that, I'm sure.
Yes.
And Mother was very conscious of those things. And I think that's possibly because of her living in a small town background. I have problems with that. I'm too much of a city girl. It doesn't matter to me. But that even though Mother and I look alike, we were very, very different. Very different. Because my past 30 years, too, were different. I mean, she lived in here, and I came from off of college, 30 years in a college campus, which gives a different perspective to living, totally.
Why don't you talk a little bit about the perspective that you
Well,
attained
it's sort
there?
of living in a college community is living in somewhat of a stereotype community because it's geared to theory rather than practice, and sometimes applying the theory isn't always true in the real world. And I know my husband used to say that we would have to bring our kids to Wickford for the summer to get their heads on straight.
to a real place.
To a real place where there were all kinds of people, all kinds of occupations, and college campus just isn't diversified enough. But it's a wonderful life for a family. It's great. Education is wonderful. It's still wonderful.
Forgive my ignorance. What were you and John doing on the
My
campus?
husband was a football coach initially, and then he was in charge of the hockey and the hockey arena at the University of Connecticut, and he was the tennis coach. And
Were you working too?
no, I took it, well, I did at the end, I did. The last 10 years I worked, 10, 12 years I worked. I was a reading consultant. But first
So you
years I was
followed in
there,
your
I was...
mother's footsteps
Yes.
to some extent.
Yes, I did. Yes. Only my teaching career was geared to a younger child. Actually, kindergarten through 8th grade, I was responsible for. And now we're here, retired. We live half the year here and half the year south of the border, so to speak. And the half of the year that I'm here, I'm active in
St. Paul's?
St. Paul's as an active member of the Altar Guilds and out at Smith's Castle, or the Rhode Island Plantation, as we like to call it. Rhode Island Plantation, is that correct? He's not listening. That's right. And that's interested me. My folks were very involved with the Kokomskasuk. And that's
I
another
remember
name
meeting
for
your
the-
mother in costume out there once,
Yes,
some years
yes.
ago. Yeah.
And
You had mentioned that your mother inherited a lot of property at one point. How did that occur, and what were the...
well, as I said, there were a number of Reynoldses. And the generation before my mother's, there was her father and the father's brother, Charles. And my grandfather owned about 6 pieces of property in town, and his brother owned another 6 pieces. We owned actually 12 homes. There were about 23 rentals, I guess it was, at one time. And when the brother died, his wife, when she died in 1938, left everything to my mother. And they had no children, so it was to go from my mother to me. And now we have left my mother's house, which is down the street here, and one little cottage on Pleasant Street. That's all we have left. And our house at the end of Maine. But the real estate, certainly, as you will agree, has changed
Yes,
100-fold.
it seems to keep on changing,
Since
too.
those days when before World War II, and I think World War II played a great part in changing
The advent of
image
Quonset Point.
of Wickford. Actually, I thought it was an improvement. I'm not sure that everybody would agree with that, but I always felt that it was definitely an improvement to the town in terms of getting different types of people from other parts of the country. It went from a fishing village to a rather cosmopolitan, international even, village.
Do you
And,
remember some of those Navy days?
Oh, very definitely. Very definitely. Wonderful, wonderful days. And of course, I sailed out here. I had my own boat, so I was privy to everything that was going on in the bay from here to Newport and back.
Must have been an exciting life for a young person.
It was very exciting. And if you've always loved the water, you certainly enjoy being on the water. Comes our neighbor, Tom Steer. Tom's...
Just saw you over there.
That's right. Tom...
Hi, Tom.
Tom is living in my grandfather's house, the Reynolds homestead, where my mother was born and raised, married. He's certainly done a lot with it, and it looks very nice. Don't you have relaxed and wonderful? Yes, it is nice, very nice. I did a video yesterday around town, a family video. We're doing a inside the homes, outside, little history for our family. And we took a tour of the street here and Church Lane, where of course our daughter lives, and through the old Narragansett Church. And we have yet to do the interior of my mother's house to show some of the hand-carved woodwork. I mean, people just don't realize the artistry that went into some of these old homes here. They're so beautiful. The curly maple staircase, the tiger maple stair treads, rope molding on the corners.
You don't see
of
anything
the
like it today.
You don't. It's really wonderful. I just can't say enough about the way they built these houses on the street. And I think this is why this street is so important nationally, historically.
It's very unique. It is unique.
I'm sure some people wouldn't be impressed, I suppose, by the old houses and all of the problems I suspect they think we have, and we do have problems, but they're no different than you have in a new house. We lived in a reproduction for 20 years over in Connecticut, a colonial house that was reproduced. It had more drafts than we'll ever have in our house down here. So I find them charming. Now, our house is not that old, actually. The main part of the house is 1837, but the rest of the house was changed in the turn of the century. In fact, they moved a house that was right beside it over onto Pleasant Street. I don't know whether you were aware of that or not. But on that 1888 map, you can see, the original map, you can see where the two houses were side by side, and they moved the one.
Your house is a refreshing high Victorian cottage, I think.
And growing up, the natives, or the children of the natives, the kids that I knew in town here used to make fun of me and say, "Oh, you live in that house. That is such an awful house, with the towers and the widow was walking."
It didn't fit the 18th century architecture.
It didn't fit the image of Main Street, USA. So
but the longer you're here, the more affection you have for the examples of different architecture. If you walk down Pleasant Street is a wonderful mix of 18th and 19th century architecture. It's got everything all thrown together. You have the Updike House, a beautiful example, perhaps the best in town of the 18th century, but then you have some lovely Victorians.
Well, the one across the street is a Reynolds house. Do you know the first one on the left?
Yes.
That is a Reynolds house, and on the north side of that house, there's a stained glass window. And the stained glass window is our coat of arms. It's the Reynolds coat of arms.
Oh, my.
And the man that put it in put the windows in the Washington Cathedral. Joseph Reynolds. He was a famous stained glass artist.
What a wonderful thing.
Isn't that? We would give anything to have the window. We've tried.
I bet you would.
We've tried.
They won't let go of it, huh?
No.
Oh, my.
And of course, there's no Reynolds involved in it at all now.
Well, maybe you could have it duplicated or something, and that
we've
might,
offered to replace it with another stained glass window, and just so we could have our own coat of arms. Because this man was famous. He was written up in several New York Times and
famous artist.
Yeah. But he did do the Washington Cathedral, and that is magnificent.
Yes. That's a great monument.
Yeah.
You've seen that we have done a walking tour for the festival this year, a walking tour of the old houses. And we had a very hard time leaving any house out because almost every house has, if it doesn't have an architectural pedigree, it has a famous person, a memorable person who lived there, or more than a few. So any architectural tour, any walking tour of this town could be rather long. with all the details
Well,
of who lived
that's
there
true.
and why the house is a fine example of one or another period.
Well, of course, your doorways, too, were significant. My grandmother used to tell me about the different doorways. It would depend upon the wealth of the man who built the house.
It was often highly decorated.
Yes, highly decorated. And you could tell, usually the house was a sturdier house if it had a fancier doorway. And wonderful architecture. But the doorways are also different to me. It's just, I love to just walk up and down and see the...
Your mother's house, just behind you here, has a very lovely doorway. It's a almost high classic doorway of Wickford. I think probably the man who built many of these houses, or the men who built them, probably were the same group during the period around 1800.
Could be. They're all about the same. Well, we have one 1735 as the oldest. Isn't it George Thomas? Is that the oldest? Yeah. I can never remember those
But there was a large group that were built around 1790, 1810, and very similar center chimney houses like your mother's. The detailing is quite similar, but the changes relate to details. Interior moldings, interior paneling, interior stairway, the
paneling
richness
too.
of
That's
it.
the interior paneling. You have a lot of paneling in your house, don't
Well,
you?
our paneling's not original though, and I think your mother's
Yes,
is.
it is,
Yes.
yeah.
And I know in the Case house it's original paneling. So there are some houses with that go back that far. Well, when you came back here, what you had already referred to the desire to come back here after you left the university. What was it like coming back here so many years after having been here in the summers, adjusting to a different rhythm of life?
Well, yeah, I think it was difficult for me to leave a college campus. There were so many perks, so many advantages culturally, sports-wise. And this I missed terribly. We missed the theater. But nothing has changed here, really. I mean,
That's
one
reassuring.
goes to Ryan's, sees another generation, but the family is still there. The caring family is
We
still
give
there.
thanks to Ryan's.
We go to Wilson's.
Yes, and to Wilson's.
And I remember the first Wilson store with the father and the haberdashery, and Paul and I as young children. I mean, nothing has changed. You see different faces, but everything is the same, and it's wonderful. My husband grew up in a town similar to this in Marblehead, Massachusetts,
Yes.
and he feels that has changed so drastically that he didn't want to go back there. He thinks Wickford is like Marblehead was 25 years ago. And this is the reason we really did retire here. He loves it here.
You know, some of the continuity, Gene, in Wickford is not only the physical continuity, but the continuity of leading families like the Ryans and the Wilsons
That's true.
that continue the traditions established.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
And that's a very important aspect here. And those of us who are newcomers from outside appreciate that. And as your husband did, he felt he couldn't go home again, but he found a home here that he
Well, you
dearly
get that
loves.
sense, don't you? Don't you think you get that sense of continuity and family and spirit here? Probably people grumble and so forth, the things that aren't quite right, but there's a lot of solace here. I mean, just sitting on the town dock and getting the breezes and looking out at that water, I can't help but think, I mean, to me, even though I live 58 miles inland, I used to say to my husband, if I can't get back and smell that salt water, forget it. That's in my veins. I got to have a breath of that low tide, so to speak. I love it. I love that mud smell. I do.
You know you're back here
That's
at the
right.
sea. Yes,
That's right.
That's right.
Are we running out of time?
I think we've got a few more minutes.
Oh, great. This
we
is
haven't
great. Wonderful.
anything scheduled for
I
a few
can't
more
believe
minutes.
that I had anything to offer simply because I am. My family has been here for years.
You take it for granted, I think.
Well, I do. I think you're right. I do take a lot for granted in
think
terms of my history.
If John were
I've
here,
forgotten more. I've forgotten more than
Most
I ever
of us
know.
know.
Right, right.
if John were here, I think he could probably provoke some recollections because he has the point of view of someone from another place.
Well, that's true, but he has a different perspective. He knows all the fishermen. They stop at, he stands out by his garage and putters, and he has that fireplace working in the garage, which of course my great uncle did too, all the time. That was his solace away from the inside of the house.
He has a
And,
stove in the garage?
Oh no, there's a fireplace.
Actually, fireplace.
Working fireplace.
Wow.
And he knows all of the fishermen, and they come in and borrow tools or leave a fish hook or whatever they do. I don't know what they do. I see them out there.
Anyway, there's a lot
They
of
go back and forth, and he
communication.
has a
Huh?
great repartee with them, which is wonderful. They have them.
If John is at home, he's a willing conversationalist and pass the time of day and the subjects of the day.
That's about it,
I've
and
found-
that's what he loves about it.
Yeah.
And he loves
The
to be
small
out there.
town atmosphere, I guess,
Yes.
has been described as.
Yes.
Yeah.
Probably better than I, because he grew up in a small town, and I sometimes feel like a bull in a china shop here, because I never want to do anything to offend my family, and yet I'm like my mother. I sort of speak straight too. Also,
Let's talk about your mother for a little bit, because
Okay.
we did a little, but I think she deserves more attention. Maybe we could recollect something about her early period here. She probably told you a lot of her
well,
recollections.
she did. You see, the town was just very, very small, and she had a very sheltered life, very sheltered. I mean, her recollections go back to people like the Lewis brothers and Houghton Anderson, and I'm sure these names that I don't know that there's anybody left that would even remember them. I mean, I just found her high school picture.
What year was she at high school?
You had to ask that. 1924,
So she was born at the turn of the century.
1906.
1906.
Yeah. And I don't know that there's anybody left, and I had trouble recognizing some of the names, but I did recognize Houghton Anderson. He was one of her classmates. And after she came back here, I think after 1938, I think she became a more participant in the town. But then when she came to live here and she became active on the Historic Commission, I really think she had a lot to offer. I used to listen to her talk about some of her...
She was an important person on the Historic Commission. I've heard a lot of discussion about her important role there. She fought long and hard to preserve the village.
Well, yes, and I think she was not particularly concerned with the nitty-gritty plantings and so forth. I think she just wanted to keep the general facade of the town the way it was, and
She had the imagination, though, to realize what was worth fighting for.
yes, and I think this is something that she really contributed. Otherwise, Mother was really not a social person. She said she would leave that to me, to become the ambassador for her, because I was certainly a lot more gregarious than she. And became more, and I would become involved where she would be glad to be the Indian if I would be the chief.
Huh.
Absolutely. I mean, she just sat back and said, "You do it." Now maybe she was tired, but I never knew my mother to be a leader other than in the classroom, and I think that's where her forte was, is in the classroom.
I was impressed that, for instance, as a longtime Episcopalian, that she was very early on able to accept the idea of women as priests.
Yes.
And that impressed me, that she could see that.
She would accept that, but she didn't like lay people offering communion and things like that.
She didn't like them participating.
No.
Lay chalice bearers and such.
Not at all.
Well,
We've had many discussions about that, because I myself doesn't matter really to me, but she did to her.
Did you ever do chalice bearing yourself?
No. I am hoping to become a Stevens minister, but I have not been able to be in any one place where they're giving the course long enough for them to accept me. I tried in Florida to do that, and that's when I became involved in that. I brought that back several years ago to St. Paul's and all the materials, and said I hope that we do that here, because I think there's a necessity.
It's well underway now.
Oh, it's well underway. But
Yes.
you see in Florida, of course, there's a big necessity because there's so many older people,
Yeah,
and there's so
yeah.
many needs.
We do have a lot of older people here in the village, and one of the nice things about it is that the village is small enough so that we can see each other, and they get out, and the younger people mix with them. It's a true community in the sense that the generations have an opportunity to mix, and there are children here in the village too.
Yes. I think that was hard for her, though. She didn't really, she felt that you had to have a collar on to administer the sacrament. I think there's a lot of older people that feel that way. They also feel, we were raised, of course, Mother was a Baptist for many years. We became Episcopalians later on in life. And she always felt the need for the minister to come and call the preacher or the priest or someone.
She felt that was very important.
Very important to touch base, and she didn't want any lay person doing it for the priest. And she was very outspoken about that. And I would try to convey to her that she had family support, and then the priest had to be where there was no family support. That did not cut ice, unfortunately. We didn't really accomplish much of that respect. She had her own set mind about a lot of things. I'm sure a lot of people have the same.
Do you recollect some of her guiding words, and did she have some family stories to tell?
I think perhaps some of the family stories that she might tell would be rather personal that I probably wouldn't tell. But she was very proud. And one of the early things that I learned was that family stories were kept under the hat.
Kept for the family.
And now we were just talking, as a matter of fact, we were just talking about that, and I said, you know, I was so set, or I was so told as a youngster not to repeat some of these family stories that now I don't even remember what they were, because never say those things, never talk about them. So I'm sure we have a lot of family tales, but right now because it's been a difficult year too, and I think as I start writing things down, I'm a great writer of words, and I like to keep
You're probably doing
a journal of family history, so to speak, and I'm forever jotting things down that I remember that she's said or done, or because she had some funny sayings. I mean, we always had a lot of good laughs with Mom. She loved the cocktail hour. That was our good, joyous time, and of course, being brought up Baptist, that is really funny, because one never even had a drink much.
She seemed to be very relaxed, though, as an older person. She seemed to change her lifestyle somewhat. The example of her reading material in the hospital, for instance, she had her own ideas.
Her vicarious being.
Yes. She knew what she liked. Yeah. It was exciting to know her. My golly.
Yes, we used to pass these novels back and forth. Light reading, it's called.
Diversion.
Nothing too deep. Well, you read for pleasure and you read for learning. You do both. And actually, in the last 6 months, she didn't read at all, which was awful for her. She was bored out of her mind, but she just couldn't attend.
Couldn't read.
I think she knew down deep. And even up to the last 2 hours of her life, she wouldn't admit it. She wouldn't make her peace. Fortunately, Father Towler just happened through the hospital 1 hour before she died, gave her communion. He had no idea. He came home here. She died. We called him. Well, we actually had told Peter, and Peter called him and said, "My goodness, I was just there. She couldn't have died." He said, "I gave her communion." And I had left just before he came in, and I had said to her, "Well, I think I'll go home, fix supper, and then I'll be back." "No, don't come back. Stay home. Be good." And that was it. I knew.
Parting words, huh?
Yeah, she didn't want me there. So she's a very private person. And I probably knew of anybody. I was the one that would know what was on her mind, and it was something very private, personal. And when you know this about someone, when they talk to you, when you get done talking to them, you just turn off so that you don't ever remember, and it's sort of like a blessing. I don't. And if I remember it, it's in my heart. I don't talk
You don't
about it.
carry it around
Yeah,
actively.
and it's not a burden. Not a burden at all. It's wonderful. Wonderful feeling. I mean, she's sharing all this with us.
Yes, I'm sure she is.
Oh,
She's
I mean,
probably enjoying it.
She's probably saying,
Probably
"Boy, you
saying,
got it.
why don't you get
got
it right?
She's probably saying, what are you telling him that for?
Well, you know, much of the impetus for doing just what we're doing, talking about the village and its people, comes from the regrettable loss of people like your mother, Betty.
That's true.
Yes, and we have lost several of those that we would really like to have here
Oh,
to talk
I know.
with.
Oh, there's many. My grandfather was a wonderful speaker. I mean, just had so many. He had wonderful stories to tell about this town. I mean, as a young man, it's just, you know. And I wish we had tapes of people like this. I wish we'd written them down, because we always say that. One of the things we did do in our family, which I am proud of, we did do a history of our house. And I made my mother sit down and narrate it, and I have it all. So I think our time is up. We are being taken over by
Good morning,
Mr.
Ken, or
Mumford.
good
and
afternoon. Mr. Mumford's arrived.
Mr. Mumford has arrived, and he's the next for the...
No, I'm not. I've been around here a long time.
Thanks very much, Gene.
Thank you very nice to...
We'll do some more of this.
Whoops.
We'll do.